In the UK, the opposition Labour Party has in recent months been engulfed by a row over anti-Semitism, with a former mayor suspended and dozens of activists expelled. Across Europe, meanwhile, anti-Semitic attacks have been on the rise. One of Britain's best-known Jewish journalists, Jonathan Freedland, wrote a passionate op-ed in The Guardian earlier this year, headlined, "My plea to the left, treat Jews the same way you treat any other minority." So, does the left, and in particular the pro-Palestinian movement, have an anti-Semitism problem? Or are such accusations used to shield Israel from justified criticism? Earlier, I was joined to debate all this by The Guardian's Jonathan Freedland, by Israeli journalist Lisa Goldman, and by Noura Erakat, a Palestinian-American human rights lawyer and academic. I began by asking Jonathan Freedland what it is about the current climate in Europe and on the left that worries him so much.
In a way, the change that's happened is that they have become more prominent, partly because there's been a change of leadership in the British Labour Party, with a new leader who is and has a very good record of campaigning for Palestinian rights. But he's brought in, I think, some new people who are attracted by his more radical brand of politics. And some of them, and some, it's not all, have carried some of these, I think, quite difficult and problematic attitudes. So I don't think this is some new overnight change. I think rather this is something that has been brewing for a while, and for a long time people like me and others who were saying, look, hey, there's a problem here. We couldn't really get much attention on this issue.
A lot of people, Jonathan, say this charge of anti-Semitism is exaggerated. It's used as a shield to protect Israel's misdeeds, and that legitimate criticism of Israel is, including quote-unquote anti-Zionism, which we'll come on to, shouldn't be conflated with anti-Semitism, with hating, demonizing all Jews. What do you say to them?
So I think that's obviously right. Criticism, legitimate criticism of Israel, there's no problem with that. Anyone who reads my column in The Guardian knows that I dish it out plenty, and I write for a Jewish newspaper, the Jewish Chronicle, as well, and I'm fiercely critical of Israel, Israeli policy, and government policy going back decades, including and particularly of the occupation since 1967. So that kind of criticism is fine. The problem is that just because sometimes, that not all criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish doesn't mean that it never is. Sometimes it is. The way it's expressed, if it borrows from or draws on the language or imagery of old-style anti-Jewish prejudice, then it is.
Lisa Goldman, we're seeing more of this problem with anti-Semitism that parts of the left have, parts of the radical pro-Palestinian movement, whatever you want to call it, have. Do you agree with that? Is that what you're seeing?
Well, I do see it on the rise in Europe on the left, but the crude anti-Semitism I'm seeing comes from the radical right. People who are, Donald Trump's supporters. We have his campaign bringing out a lot of white supremacists who have been tweeting some unbelievable things, gas chambers, and they took one journalist, one American Jewish journalist, and they posted a photograph with her photoshopped so that she was wearing a striped concentration camp uniform.
Noura, does the left, does the broader pro-Palestinian movement have a problem with anti-Semitism? That's my one question. My follow-up is, just to bear in mind, and can you define Zionism for us? I'm going to ask my other two guests also, because that's part of this whole debate.
They have a big problem with anti-Semitism. That's why they fight against it. It's part of the ethos that drives them for Palestinian liberation and self-determination, not only for Palestinians, but for all people, including Jews. Does the left, this amorphous body of millions of people, incubate people who are jerks and bigots? Absolutely. Where are they going to hide? They're part of the right, they're part of the left, they're part of the center, they're part of society. That's the work that we're trying to do. On the second, Zionism has a theoretical strand as well as a practical strand. In theory, it works to, it's a movement to establish a Jewish homeland for Jewish people who want to have a state, right? But in practice, in the way that it's been implemented in Palestine, right, in mandatory Palestine, it has equated with the systematic forced displacement, dispossession, removal, and exile of Palestinians. And so we can talk about it in theory and be supportive of it and what Jews want for themselves, but in practice we have to be really critical. Zionists didn't come to the Middle East to be neighbors and to reestablish their roots in the Middle East. They came to be conquerors. They didn't come to live with Palestinians, they came to live in place of Palestinians. And we need to distinguish also those who who came before the establishment of the State of Israel, who actually did want to live with Palestinians and rehabilitate the roots.
Well, let me bring Jonathan back in there. Do you want to respond to Noura and also give me what your definition of Zionism is?
I really appreciate Noura's distinction between theory and practice, and I think that's tremendously important. Part of the problem that has arisen in this country, in Britain, but elsewhere in, I think, European discussions, and particularly affects the left, is the idea that even the theoretical idea, and even beyond that, just the emotional need, the yearning that many Jews feel for a place of their own, let's put it no more specific than that, even that theoretical idea is dismissed as somehow racist, imperialist, and I think there was, that language of conquest, absolutely true in practice, that the Zionist aspiration for a Jewish home came at the most terrible price in dispossession of Palestinians. But the yearning itself, the need for a Jewish haven, a place that they could call their own, I don't believe that is a conqueror's need. That was the need of a persecuted and dispossessed people. And it's that emotional need that many Jews feel is under attack when people on the left brand them online as Zios or Zionist fascists or Zionist murderers just for feeling that need.
Jonathan, the chief rabbi in the UK, Ephraim Mervis, wrote recently that Zionism is, quote, a noble and integral part of Judaism. One can no more separate it from Judaism than separate the City of London from Great Britain. Do you agree with that? And isn't that grist to the mill to hardcore anti-Semites who blame everything that Israel does on all Jews everywhere?
Well, of course it depends entirely on what you mean or Chief Rabbi Mervis means by Zionism. If he means the longing for a homeland and a home, and specifically the attachment to what Jews since the Bible have called the land of Israel and what Palestinians would call Palestine, then that is integral to Judaism. It would be much more convenient if it wasn't, but Jews pray 3 times a day and turn east to face Jerusalem. They pray and invoke Jerusalem in all their prayers. It is, I'm afraid, bound up with Jewish religion, and moreover, in Jewish life now, even Jews who are not religious feel an attachment and an affinity to what is the largest Jewish society in the world. Now that's difficult because it means you can't easily separate and disentangle and say, look, my hostility is only towards Israel. I've got no problem with Jews. The trouble is, Israel and Jews are intimately bound up with each other.
Let me put that point to Lisa. Lisa, if the two are bound up together, as Jonathan puts it, if it's very hard to kind of separate them out, how then are you able, as a critic of Israel, as an anti-Zionist, how do you not be anti-Semitic if they're bound together in that way?
Okay, I'm not an anti-Zionist, but you meant how does one who describes himself as an anti-Zionist?
How does one who describes himself as an anti-Zionist, indeed?
So Zionism, as it's imagined or as it's practiced today, it's a late 19th century political movement, right? There are Jews who are not Zionists who pray to Jerusalem, who face east and pray to Jerusalem. There are Hasidic Jews who reject the modern entity of the State of Israel. So not all Jews who face Jerusalem to pray 3 times a day or who remember Jerusalem in their prayers are Zionists. So I think, at the same time, it would be really unfair of me to say that, Jews can't feel an emotional connection to the State of Israel, because I think that Jews who were brought up in the diaspora tend to look at Israel as a sort of an ideal rather than a real, deeply flawed place. And also, I think there is a post-Holocaust trauma that we have to acknowledge. Whether or not these are fears, then we can't say that they're logical or illogical. They just are. And there is a sense that Jews need a haven. And when you talk about Zionism, it's an ideology that's about state building.
Okay.
May I?
Briefly, Noura.
So I am an anti-Zionist, but I want to point out the difficulty that Jonathan, who began by being nuanced, put me in a position now where I have to explain in response to your question that I'm not an anti-Semite. If in fact the theory and the practice are distinct, and then in the same breath you're saying that Judaism and Zionism are intimately linked, then that's doublespeak. It puts me in a position where I have taken a position on the practice of the state building project, of saying that I oppose the state building project. I oppose not only what it necessitated, but what it continues to necessitate on a daily basis in violence against the lives and livelihoods of a native Palestinian population, that now you're saying that violence is intimately linked to a Jewish religion, where, as Lisa pointed out, there are strands on the left and the religious sectors of Jewish belief
let Jonathan respond.
Don't support the state of Israel.
Jonathan.
I'm glad Noura put that there, because no, absolutely, I'm not putting her in that box. I'm saying, in fact, to use the distinction she made, I think it's absolutely fine, and more than fine. Of course, it's completely legitimate to hold the position she has. But it's that first understanding of what she, as she put it, the sort of theoretical or abstract case. I would say perhaps an emotional case. That is what is bound up with many people's Jewish identity.
So Palestinians, people on the pro-Palestinian side, on the left, Arabs, etc., get very frustrated because they're told, don't blame Jews for Israel's occupation. Rightly so, that's anti-Semitic. Then they're also told, and you mentioned in your piece, you mentioned on the show, that the vast majority of Jews are either Zionist or they feel Israel is central to their identity.
No, so I think the distinction is easy. I can see why it seems difficult, and both you and Noura have mentioned it. It's easy. What you say is most Jews have an attachment to the idea, just as Lisa said, of a Jewish haven, a homeland. That does not mean they support the policies or particularly the occupation that has been pursued since 1967. That is a political opinion that will divide Jews and divide non-Jews. There's nothing in Judaism that commits you to that.
But Jonathan, what if you go beyond the homeland point? What if you say I'm opposed to the idea of a Jewish majority state as currently constructed within the borders it currently inhabits since 1948? Does that make you anti-Semitic?
I think if you are singling out the Jewish people as the one people in the world who cannot manifest in practice the need or desire or right to self-determination, you need to be able to explain why Jews are uniquely denied that right. You may be able to explain it, in which case no problem.
Okay, Lisa?
Israel also, says that they're actually uniquely good, that they're a light unto the nations. So, on the one hand, you have Israel saying that it's unique, and then there are other, and on the other hand, you have people criticizing Israel who's saying that it's uniquely evil. I tend to, reject both. I don't like this idea of uniqueness.
Noura, do you understand, do you empathize with a Jewish point of view which says, you know what, we are a people who have been heavily persecuted over the years, singled out in the societies we lived in. And now we have this one state, the only country in the world where we're a majority, where our festivals, our culture, our religion is there. And that's the state that has more UN resolutions against it, more rallies against it, more protests against it, etc., etc. Can you understand why they think that might be anti-Semitic? Even if you don't agree it is, do you understand why they might think that?
I can definitely think that if they're not going to study history, that they would think that they are uniquely challenged. But if you are going to revisit history, in 1946, when the League of Mandates was actually annulled, the only two colonial societies that didn't experience self-determination were Namibia and Palestine. Namibia has been liberated. It's no longer under colonial occupation. Palestine is the one remaining outstanding institution that was slated for self-determination in 1919 under the covenant that has not experienced that. So it's just a matter of math.
And moving beyond the left, in terms of Middle East societies, in terms of the kind of anti-Semitic imagery, rhetoric, some of the stuff you see imported from Europe, the protocols of the Elders of Zion, Mein Kampf, conspiracy theories about Jews, you do see a lot of that in Middle East societies. Surely you wouldn't deny that?
No, I wouldn't deny that we see a lot of it in Middle East societies, and I also think that we work against it, both in Middle East societies and in the movement work that we do. We don't want, as part of our movement, any kind of degrading, racialized violence against any group of people, not in the Middle East, not anywhere else.
And before we finish, because we're running out of time, how much of this row over anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism is to do with an imprecision of language, that people are talking at cross purposes, that people are talking about it in different definitions? You're all involved in this debate. Jonathan, would you agree with that?
Yeah, very often people think Zionist means the policies pursued this week by Bibi Netanyahu rather than the way Jews understand that word, which is referring to that longing for national self-determination or for a safe haven. So though that term is often involves cross purposes, I think there's a great deal of misunderstanding surrounding this subject.
Okay, Lisa?
There's tons of misunderstanding. A lot of it is willful misunderstanding, and I think that of all the political debates that I've ever been involved in, policy debates, the Israel-Palestine debate is the one that's most shockingly devoid of any kind of nuance or any kind of search for nuance, and I find it very depressing, frankly.
Noura, I'm going to give you the last word.
I think that obviously there is willful misunderstanding that's constructed, but at the end of the day, those who are part of a movement against Zionism are part of a liberatory movement, not only for Palestinians, but it has an emancipatory potential for Jewish people as well.
So you believe it can work for everyone?
It will work for everyone.
It will work for everyone. Okay, well, let's see what happens. Thank you all for joining me on UpFront. That's our show. UpFront will be back soon.